What if death is not the end? There are interviews so powerful they never see the light of day. Not because they're fake, but because the world isn't ready. Not yet. This is one of them. In 2025, buried deep in a forgotten digital archive at Cambridge, a nameless audio file was unearthed. No title, no record. Only one clue in the metadata: Hawking, consciousness beyond. At first it was dismissed, another hoax, another internet myth, until the voice was analyzed. And it was him, the unmistakable voice of one of the greatest minds in modern science, Stephen Hawking. But what he said on that recording was nothing like his public speeches. This wasn't about equations or black holes. This was about the one question he'd avoided all his life. What happens when we die? What you're about to hear is not a theory. It's a revelation. Not a confession of faith, but a map to the soul. This interview didn't vanish by chance. It was buried, hidden, encrypted, and now it's time to uncover it. Part 1. The file that shouldn't exist. In the spring of 2025, a quiet research group at Cambridge was combing through restricted archives for an unrelated thesis on information theory. Deep in a forgotten database, accessible only through layers of encryption, they stumbled upon an unlabeled audio file. At first glance, it was meaningless. Its name, a string of random characters. No date, no context, nothing to suggest significance. But embedded within the metadata was a single cryptic phrase: Hawking, consciousness beyond. At first, the team dismissed it as a poorly stored lecture fragment. But then they played it. What they heard changed everything. The digital voice that emerged from the speakers was unmistakable, slow, electronic, and carefully measured. To the trained ears of physicists, it was as familiar as Einstein's equations. It was Stephen Hawking. And yet, this wasn't a lecture. It wasn't a panel. It was a conversation, a private interview. The interviewer's voice was altered, masked, possibly through digital processing. No identity could be established. Some suspected it was a deliberate choice to protect both the source and the scientist. Others believed the voice was synthetic, maybe not even human. But the voice of Hawking was real. Voice print analysis confirmed it with 99.98% certainty. More importantly, the file's creation date was logged somewhere between 2002 and 2004, during a period when Hawking had almost completely withdrawn from public interviews. So why did this file exist? Why was it hidden? The first 10 minutes of the recording were benign. Hawking discussed gravity, time, entropy, concepts he had long mastered. Then something shifted. The interviewer asked a single question that changed everything. Professor Hawking, if information inside a black hole cannot be destroyed, is it possible that consciousness also continues beyond death? There was silence, no answer for 10 seconds. Then Hawking breathed, barely audible, and finally he said, "This is a question I've studied more than I've admitted publicly. In the academic world, that single sentence is a seismic tremor." Hawking, the man who famously claimed that death is like a computer shutting down, no afterlife, no heaven, no soul, was now suggesting otherwise. But it wasn't a contradiction. It was a layer he had never revealed to the public. He began to explain. If information is truly conserved, even in the most extreme environments like black holes, then cognitive patterns, memories, perceptions might also be forms of information that do not simply vanish. Not souls in the religious sense, but information structures. What religions have long called the soul, he suggested, might actually be a non-localized field of quantum data, governed not by faith, but by physics. When the brain stops working, Hawking said, we assume consciousness dies. But what if we're only measuring the wrong thing? What if consciousness is not a function of the brain, but a phenomenon distributed across the quantum substrate of reality? This wasn't poetic speculation. It was a hypothesis he had built quietly, in collaboration with physicists and neurobiologists, working under the radar of institutional academia. The idea wasn't entirely new. Theories like Orkor by Penrose and Hameroff had flirted with quantum consciousness, but Hawking took it further. He proposed that just as black holes do not delete information, they transform it. So too might death not erase consciousness, but shift it into another state. Death, he said in the recording, is not annihilation, it is transformation. Part 2. The quantum trace, when death leaves evidence. Hawking's voice continued, measured, deliberate, but now laced with something rare in scientific speech: conviction. If information persists, he said, it leaves traces, not in physical form perhaps, but in the quantum field. Memory, emotion, awareness, these are not just human experiences, they are patterns. He paused. And patterns can be preserved. Then came the revelation that shook the researchers to their core. Hawking spoke of a secret initiative, one that had no official documentation, no publications, and no public funding. In recent years, he said, I've worked with a team of experimental physicists and neurobiologists on something we called the Cognitive Trace Program. The goal was deceptively simple: to determine if consciousness leaves any measurable trace after biological death. It was supposed to be theoretical, a thought experiment, until it wasn't. The team had access to advanced technology normally used for mapping neural memory, tools like laser spectroscopy, quantum resonance scanning, and non-invasive neurointerfaces. Officially, these tools were used to study how memories are encoded and lost in degenerative brain diseases. Unofficially, they were used to look for something far more elusive. We observed 2 anomalies, Hawking said. In both cases, during the exact moment of clinical death, we recorded quantum spikes, bursts of coherent activity that did not align with any known biological process. He called it a quantum echo. Not electricity, not brainwaves, but something else. A structured discharge, as if the departing consciousness left behind a footprint. Hawking's voice turned quiet. Memory, emotion, even fragments of personality. Not in the flesh, but in the field. This, he said, mirrored black hole behavior. Information isn't lost, it's encoded on the event horizon. It exists in a new form undetectable to crude instruments. What if the brain is the same? What if, at the moment of death, consciousness is projected outward, encoded not on flesh, but on the quantum horizon of our reality? The interviewer asked a chilling question. Is that what you believe the soul is? Hawking responded after a long pause. Yes, if you strip away religious metaphor, what remains is the idea of an informational soul, something real, measurable, but only if we develop the right tools to detect it. But then came a disturbing twist. Hawking revealed that shortly after those findings, multiple segments of the research group were disbanded. Funding was cut, access revoked, and those who led the most successful trials, they disappeared. No formal explanation, no public mention. Hawking did not name anyone, but those familiar with the Cognitive Trace Project quickly linked it to Dr. Mark Euler, a respected physicist who had previously collaborated with Hawking. Euler vanished in 2004. No trace, no body, no explanation. The incident was never covered by the media, but in classified documents later accessed by a second group of researchers, an experiment labeled number 14 stood out. During that test, quantum radiation, highly localized and inexplicable, was recorded 4 minutes after the subject's documented death. The report's language was chillingly precise. Probability of spontaneous quantum signal generation under laboratory conditions, less than 0.0001%. It was the first physical evidence supporting the cognitive trace hypothesis. Part 3. Hidden coordinates and the secrets beneath Geneva. As Hawking's voice faded, the researchers sat in stunned silence, not because of what they heard, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a scientific scandal buried in digital dust. They replayed the audio, every second of it, and that's when they found something no one had noticed. Beneath the speech, beneath the pauses, there were strange sounds. Clicks, pulses, faint bursts of modulated noise buried in the frequency range most humans wouldn't detect. Forensic analysts ran a spectral breakdown. The verdict? Intentional digital markers. Someone had encrypted more than a voice inside this recording. And when the forensic algorithm decrypted the embedded pulses, it revealed coordinates. A random string of numbers at first glance, but when plotted on a map, the data pointed to a location just outside Geneva, CERN. Not the public entrance, not the main collider. An off-site research facility, officially decommissioned in 2005. But according to several insiders, it had once housed a secret initiative known internally as Project Echo. The lead scientist, Dr. Mark Euler, the same man Hawking had worked with, the same man who vanished. The research team filed repeated access requests to CERN. Months passed. Legal pressure mounted. Finally, limited documents were released under the classification tag, Cognitive Echo Level C. What they found was more than disturbing. A report from 2002 stated, during experiment 14, anomalous quantum radiation was observed. The emission began precisely at the moment of clinical death and persisted for 4 minutes post-mortem. Another document revealed something chilling. Likelihood of this phenomenon occurring by chance, less than 1 in 10 million. A third file, buried in a seemingly unrelated collection of neurobiology logs, contained a single phrase. Correlation observed between brain resonance and ambient quantum field post-termination. Test subject may have transferred coherent pattern. It was the missing piece. Hawking's theory wasn't speculation. It had already been tested, already measured, and hidden. But the question remained, why? Why suppress findings that could change our understanding of life and death? Hawking answered that in the next section of the recording. His voice dropped lower, the rhythm slower, as if what he was about to say carried a different kind of weight. This is not knowledge humanity is prepared for, he said. Some will seek truth. Others will seek control. If consciousness continues after death, if it can be measured, stored, or worse, manipulated, then power itself changes hands. It no longer belongs to the rich, the powerful, the governments. It belongs to those who control memory, who control the echoes. Hawking had seen where the research could go, where it was already going, and that, he said, is why he refused to publish his full findings. Perhaps in the future, he said quietly, when we are less afraid of the soul and more afraid of losing it. But this was not the end of the recording, not yet. In the final few minutes, long believed to be corrupted, the team recovered a short data fragment. A few garbled seconds of audio restored their spectral interpolation. Hawking's final words in the file. Not all patterns are compatible. Only those that evolve continue. The rest are erased. For the first time, Hawking wasn't just confirming the existence of consciousness after death. He was proposing rules, a kind of natural selection of the soul. Only patterns that grow, transform, move forward. The rest, they vanish. Part 4. The Chosen 8, memory that returns after Hawking's final whisper faded into static. The team behind the audio sat in silent disbelief. It felt less like discovering a lost scientific file and more like unearthing a forbidden prophecy. But then something even more unexpected happened. The team found a second embedded file hidden within the corrupted metadata of the original recording. Not audio this time, text. A compressed document labeled Protocol of Evolution Consciousness, HWK. The file was heavily encrypted, but after hours of decryption, the text unfolded like something between a white paper and a warning. Hawking had written it in collaboration with a group of unnamed physicists, philosophers, and neuroscientists. The central thesis? Consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. It is a foundational structure of reality, subject to the same physical laws that govern energy and matter. The document drew bold parallels. Black holes preserve information. So does consciousness. Death doesn't erase, it transforms. Only evolving patterns persist. And then one sentence stood out. During periods of crisis, compatible consciousness returns, not randomly, but with purpose. This suggested that the process of reincarnation was not metaphysical mythology. It was a quantum mechanism of intelligent recursion. Hawking and his colleagues believed there existed a subset of souls, not special in morality, but in structure, that survived death in a coherent, integrated pattern. These weren't ghosts, they were cognitive carriers. The protocol referred to them cryptically as the chosen eight. 8 individuals, born not from bloodlines or faith, but from resonance. Hawking believed that under very specific conditions, such as high emotional density, unresolved cognitive patterns, and exposure to quantum environmental shifts, a consciousness could anchor itself to a future neural host. And over the past 2 decades, data was mounting. Dr. Lewis Harding, one of the researchers decoding the file, had long been studying cases of children with spontaneous memories of previous lives. Most were dismissed as fantasies, but now patterns began to emerge. From Virginia to Tokyo, Berlin to Bangkok, certain children described places, numbers, procedures, and even scientific terminology no child should know. One 6-year-old boy in Texas described in astonishing detail a laboratory in Geneva, complete with floor layout, security protocols, and the term field memory entanglement. His parents were ranchers, no scientific background, no exposure to CERN or physics. A girl in California, age 7, could recite test codes that matched logs from the cognitive echo experiments. How? There was only one explanation. The quantum trace didn't just persist, it returned. The theory took shape. Consciousness, when preserved, could resonate with compatible hosts. Not everyone, only those whose neural patterns matched the frequency signature of the original consciousness. In other words, reincarnation is not random, it's resonant. Hawking's theory didn't rely on mysticism. It relied on physics. Energy finds harmony. Information seeks coherence. And when conditions align, a soul returns. But why 8? Why were only a few consciousnesses preserved? The final paragraph of Hawking's document hinted at an unsettling filter. Only patterns that carry evolution are allowed to continue. Stagnation leads to entropy. Memory must serve growth or be erased. This wasn't reincarnation for comfort. This was natural selection for souls. And the chosen? They didn't just remember. They came back with tasks. Part 5. Consciousness Reborn, Evolution Through the Children. Dr. Harding's team began compiling a global database of reported reincarnation memory cases, initially dismissed as spiritual delusion or childhood imagination. But when the Hawking file surfaced, everything changed. Suddenly, seemingly unrelated testimonies began lining up with precision. Certain children weren't just remembering places, they were describing experiments. Some even remembered dying. And the strange part? A statistically abnormal number of these children were born between 2010 and 2022, in exact correlation with technological leaps in global crises. Hawking's prediction from the protocol echoed louder than ever. During times of disruption, compatible consciousness returns. The souls weren't just coming back randomly, they were being triggered. Many of these children displayed extraordinary abilities. One child in Berlin began writing complex code at age 5, code that mirrored fragments of neural simulation models from Project Echo. Another in Seoul understood quantum entanglement before learning basic arithmetic. A child in London refused to be addressed by her name for 2 years, insisting she had worked at the collider under the Earth. Psychologists called them delusional savants, but the evidence was mounting. The memories were too accurate, too synchronized with restricted records to be coincidence. The media never heard of these cases, but in academic circles, whispers began spreading. And among those whispers, one term kept surfacing: the evolutionaries. Harding revisited Hawking's final warning: consciousness must serve growth or vanish. This wasn't poetic metaphor. This was evolutionary law. Death was no longer the final gate. It was a filter. Those who had grown, who had adapted, who had learned something beyond the self, could pass through and return. But those who stagnated, collapsed into chaos, fear, or destruction, their patterns dissolved. They were erased. And this is where Hawking's theory took its darkest turn. If souls can evolve, then they can also be intercepted. Hawking feared this deeply. In the recording, he said, "When we understand how consciousness travels, someone will try to trap it. Because if patterns can be measured, they can be contained, stored, even weaponized." Hawking warned that whoever controlled the memory fields controlled the future of intelligence itself. Not artificial intelligence, recycled intelligence. A form of post-human reincarnation guided not by nature or karma, but by design. By the end of 2024, Harding's team documented 8 verified cases of children whose memories and abilities aligned precisely with lost members of the original cognitive echo experiments. 8. The number was no longer symbolic, they were real. The last child confirmed was born in Osaka. He had never spoken a word, until the age of 5. Then, one day, without prompting, he whispered, "Entropy fails when memory chooses to evolve." A sentence copied word for word from Hawking's encrypted document, a file never published, never leaked, never online. It meant only one thing: Hawking was right. The soul evolves, and evolution returns. Part 6. The beginning after the end. Hawking's final words in the hidden protocol were not a conclusion. They were a signal. "We do not die," he wrote, "we transform." What began as a forgotten audio file in a Cambridge basement had now ignited a firestorm of quiet discoveries. The existence of cognitive echoes after death, the persistence of quantum memory patterns, the return of consciousness through resonant reincarnation, and the evolution of souls through selection. Not salvation, Hawking's banned interview was never meant to comfort. It was a warning and an invitation. If what he said was true, then humanity stands on the brink of a new paradigm. Not religious, not spiritual, not even purely scientific, existential. Because if consciousness survives death, and if only evolving patterns continue, then everything we do, every decision, every emotion, every lesson, is being recorded. Not in books, not in hard drives, but in the invisible architecture of the universe itself. And that means our thoughts shape our return. Our growth determines our survival. Our choices decide whether we vanish or reawaken. But Hawking also feared what comes next, because anything that can be measured can be controlled. If we decode the soul, will we liberate it or will we enslave it? Will we use this knowledge to evolve as a species, or to engineer reincarnation as a system of power, privilege, etc., and manipulation? In the end, this question is not for scientists. It's for us. For the millions listening now, questioning their déjà vu, their unexplainable talents, their inexplicable fears. Maybe you've lived before. Maybe you came back for a reason. And if so, then you are not alone. Hawking believed we are part of something greater. Not above nature, but entwined with it. Consciousness, he said, is not a function. It is a path. And now, that path continues, with us. This is no longer science fiction. This is memory. This is fate. This is evolution. If this story made you think, don't let it end here. Like the video to support independent truth seekers. Share it with someone who believes there's more beyond the veil. Comment your thoughts, especially if you've experienced anything you can't explain. Subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning. The soul has a story, and we are still writing it.